this is funny?
In a cosmic sort of way, yes.
Well, Mr. Funny Man, is this how you get your sick kicks?
What? It's just an ordinary crabby... Oh my goodness!
So, recently, the Disney company announced its decision to close down Muppet Vision 3D at its location in Hollywood Studios in the Orlando Park, Walt Disney World. This news came to the dismay of many fans of the Muppets and Jim Henson's works overall, myself included, since this is actually one of the last projects Jim Henson had full involvement in and control over. While Disney has tried to provide a band-aid solution to this problem by putting the Muppets on the Rock and Roller Coaster instead of Aerosmith, which is another ride that's been in Hollywood Studios for quite a while now, the fact still remains that they're getting rid of one of the last projects that Jim Henson himself ever had any real involvement in and control over. And of course, this isn't the first time something like this has occurred. Disney has always struggled with how it chooses to utilize the Muppets as a whole. After initially buying the Muppets characters from the Jim Henson Company in 2004, Disney honestly fumbled quite a bit with them, making The Muppets Wizard of Oz an absolutely terrible made-for-TV movie featuring Ashanti and Quentin Tarantino for some reason. Maybe because Miramax was still owned by Disney at this point, I don't know. Several years after this, however, they kind of did get the Muppets back in the public eye, and in a way that felt natural with the 2011 Muppets movie, which was actually very good, and I honestly really like personally. This does feel like a very genuine, very natural attempt to bring back the Muppets into 2010's culture. This movie was actually both a commercial and a critical success, and for a brief moment of time brought the Muppets back in a really big way. The sequel to this movie, however, unfortunately flopped, despite actually, in my opinion, being good, but money talks, and this movie did not make the money Disney wanted. Around this same time, Disney was airing a Muppets TV show that was very heavily inspired by The Office on ABC, which was honestly pretty mediocre for its first season, but it got better towards the second season. However, this version of the Muppets was cancelled since Disney wasn't quite sure how to continue it. Since Muppets Most Wanted, it's been about 10 years since a theatrical Muppets movie hit theaters. Instead, what Disney has chosen to do is, due to Disney Plus TV shows, one of which was actually pretty good, make a Haunted Mansion special also exclusively for Disney Plus, and shill them at the Game Awards, which was random, but also pretty charming. Also, they're coming back to the Game Awards this year. I can't wait to see Statler and Wardolph roast everybody. But this begs the question, where exactly did Disney's mishandling of the Muppets overall really start? And funnily enough, there is a real distinct answer to this, which harkens back to the days when Jim Henson was actually still alive and just starting his relationship with the Disney company. He had many productions planned, one of which in particular is the one we're going to be discussing today, that set off everything and caused Disney to mishandle the Muppets for many, many years to come. I'm talking about Little Mermaid Island, the botched TV adaptation of Disney The Little Mermaid done by the Jim Henson Workshop. This project single-handedly caused strife between Disney and the Muppets and the Jim Henson Company for many, many years to come, and is responsible for every single mishandling that Disney has had of the Muppets since. And I'm here to explain why. So for starters, you might be thinking to yourself, I've never even heard of the Little Mermaid Island, and you'd be right to think that. This is actually a TV show that was planned to air on Disney Channel and got 2 pilot episodes done before being scrapped altogether. It's also notable for being another one of the last projects Jim Henson worked on overall. Our story begins in the 1980s when Michael Eisner took over the Walt Disney Company and began to change how all of the company operated overall. Around this time, Jim Henson was looking to rejuvenate his own projects and creations after some failed attempts at experimentation with the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. It just so happened that he and Michael happened to stumble across each other at the same time, and after some talks, decided that they would work together to bring more of Jim's projects to fruition. Henson began negotiating a deal with Disney where they would own a lot of his characters, specifically the main Muppet cast, and Disney would actually fund his own projects and let Jim Henson handle the creativity side of everything else. As a result, Jim wound up working on a few different projects he'd had in mind with Disney, specifically one being Muppet Vision 3D, another being a made-for-TV special where the Muppets actually went to Walt Disney World, and the third being Little Mermaid Island, which essentially was a live-action and puppet-produced version of The Little Mermaid and its cast of characters. Jim initially came up with the idea of making his own take on Disney's Little Mermaid after walking by an animation story meeting for The Little Mermaid when it was still in production at Disney. He was very impressed with what he saw and brought up to Disney the idea of making his own puppet TV show for the Disney Channel, using this idea. Disney immediately greenlighted this project and thought it sounded like a great idea. However, the issue here was that Jim could not currently directly work on this project since he had his hands full with Muppet Vision 3D and also the Muppets Go to Walt Disney World. As a result, the 2 episodes that currently exist of this show and are actually on the internet for your own viewing were technically not produced under Jim Henson's own supervision and more or less done by the Jim Henson Puppeteering Company and Disney themselves, just passing notes between each other more or less. The show itself is aimed at a preschool audience, so it's kept very simplistic and includes 2 new characters even, that being Scales the Dragon and Flounder's sister, I think, named Sandy. Ah yes, cause there were totally dragons in the Little Mermaid. The 2 episodes that were produced are honestly pretty basic, with one being about Sebastian's birthday and everybody's trying to surprise him, and the other being about Flounder and his sister lying, and learning to tell the truth to Ariel. However, after these 2 episodes were produced, Jim himself ended up checking up on the show and apparently did not like what he saw at all. He felt the show was rather underwhelming and was more or less just talking down to kids rather than really talking up to them. He also found the plots very formulaic and basic and not really that engaging overall. In short, this really was not living up to his standards whatsoever. These pilots were being produced in early 1990, and Jim himself ended up checking them out in March of 1990 while still working on the Muppets Go to Walt Disney World and finishing that up. However, just 2 months later in May of 1990, Jim passed away of pneumonia due to a very weak immune system. This came as a shock to not just the Jim Henson Company and the Walt Disney Company too, but also just the many fans of Jim Henson all over the world who mourn the loss of the great creator and great storyteller. This also left many of the unfinished productions that Jim had started with Disney up in the air, including Little Mermaid Island, which actually was becoming a point of contention between both Disney and the Jim Henson Company. When initially starting the negotiations with Jim, Disney actually wanted to get the rights to the Sesame Street Muppets since they saw great profitability in that. Jim refused, and Disney begrudgingly accepted just the normal Muppets as part of their conditions. However, now that Jim was dead, his kids were running the company, and Disney was trying to pester them instead to get the Sesame Street Muppets. Jim's kids were absolutely disgusted with this and decided to just pull out of their deal with Disney altogether. As a result, Disney decided to just cut their losses and scrapped everything of that Jim Henson Little Mermaid TV show that they had been working on. However, this entire fiasco had clearly caused strife between Disney and the Jim Henson Company overall, because while Disney did distribute the next 2 Muppet movies, that being Muppet Treasure Island and also Muppet Christmas Carol, the company eventually turned to Columbia Pictures to distribute Muppets from Space and also Kermit's Swamp Years. As stated before though, eventually Disney did get the Muppets characters in a deal forged in 2004, but the damage had already been done and none of Jim Henson's children chose to work with Disney on anything Muppet related going forward. As a result, this is why most post-Disney acquisition Muppet media just tends to fail and fumble and not really live up to anything Jim Henson or his children would have ever wanted, except for maybe the 2011 Muppets movie and Muppets Most Wanted, which is actually a good movie. But even with these small triumphs, Jim Henson's children still will never work with the Disney Company because everything that happened in the 1990s, and also a lot of things that stemmed from the Little Mermaid TV show, and how Jim Henson himself did feel screwed over on that show in particular. Jim's children also knew of this, and this is another reason why they never wanted to work with Disney ever again, after seeing how they had essentially just taken over a project that their father had started. So in a lot of ways, the Little Mermaid's Island is actually the start of animosity between Muppet producers and the Disney Company overall. And I personally do feel this is where Disney's fumbling of the Muppets can be traced back to overall. It really does sadden me to see this still go on today, with, like I said at the start of this video, Muppet Vision 3D being shut down. And at least of me making this video, there seem to be no plans to replace the attraction or just put it somewhere else. It really does suck to see Jim's reputation basically tarnished by Disney. However, I will say other companies do seem to be respecting his legacy, which I do appreciate. Most notably, the Jim Henson Company itself. While they don't own the Muppets themselves anymore, they've been pretty good at keeping other of Jim's creations alive, such as the Dark Crystal and Fraggle Rock, both of which have gotten new media over the last several years. So while Disney may not be doing that, I'm glad to see that the Jim Henson Company himself is keeping his name alive. He was, and always will be, a master storyteller. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a like anyway. If you want to check out all my socials down below, you can see all those down there. And if you want to join my Discord too, where you can communicate with me and others offline, that should be linked down below. And if you want to check out my letterbox, that is linked down below as well. That's where I review movies, oftentimes movies or shows I won't review here on YouTube. So you can check that out too if you want extra content from me. But for now, I've been Noah the Otter, and I'll see you on the otter side. Bye!